Treasurer Costa, how would you sum up what you've heard about the budget so far? Is it one that's good for Australia, good for the Morrison government, or both, or neither?
Well, I think it'll probably be good for the Morrison government, but as to good for Australia, look, Andrew, I feel like I'm living in a parallel universe at the moment when you look at these budgets across the country and even internationally. You know, the central banks have decided to monetise all of the government's debts across the world, and we're seeing that happening in Australia. So basically it's spend, spend, spend. You know, when you do that sort of, balance sheet winners, basically everybody loses, the next generation, taxpayers into the future. I mean, you've got the extraordinary situation. Look at the United States now with this new $1 trillion package. They've got, unemployment rates high and labour shortages in a range of areas because people won't go to work because they're receiving COVID payments. I mean, the world's gone crazy. I'm sure that the government will target all of its measures towards its political necessities. My concern is, and it's not just with the Morrison government, it's with all the state governments as well. We're living in cloud cuckoo land here. It's all borrowed money. Somebody eventually is going to have to pay for this. Whilst central banks keep monetising it, they can kick the can down the road for years and years, but it will be a day of reckoning at some point.
Michael Kroger?
Well, much of what Michael says is true. We have an aversion to debt in the Liberal Party, as most Conservative parties, centre-right parties do around the world, but we're in a situation we've never been in before, and we know why that is. But there has been one fundamental change from previous eras, Andrew, and that's the fact that interest rates are so low, governments are borrowing at 1%. I mean, it's less than the rate of inflation. So you've got the Howard government were borrowing money at 6 to 7%. So, that was then. 15 years on, we're borrowing at 1%. Well, it's basically, free loans for the government. Ultimately, of course, someone has to pay that off, and that's what worries everybody. But hopefully you can do that out of a growing economy and out of surpluses. But this has been the big change in the Western world today, which is, government borrowing at almost, it's almost free loans because the borrowing rates are so low.
Andrew, it's a big Ponzi scheme.
How we'll be able to pay it off if China decides to really pick on our iron ore exports and coal exports, then we're really going to be stuffed trying to pay it off. Michael Costa, can I come back to you on a point that you made about America? The same thing's true here. All right, we're going to raise the dole. It was low, $50 a fortnight. But the thing is, already so many employers have been telling me they can't find workers, even cleaners and fruit pickers, willing to do the job for that money. And at the meantime, the budget's also going to be offering bribes, I read, between $2,000 and $6,000 for jobless people to go move to where the farm jobs really are, not just stay home where there's nothing. I mean, I don't know, that jars a bit with me.
Oh, it jars with everybody and should jar with every taxpayer. But look, this is a big Ponzi scheme. I mean, Michael Kroger's right that interest rates are low, but remember who's buying the bulk of this government debt? It's central banks, government-mandated agencies. It's not the investment markets that are buying the bulk of this debt. It is central banks. And that's the problem we have here. This is a big Ponzi scheme. At some point, there has to be a reckoning. I agree that COVID came along and you've got to put temporary, focused measures to deal with that. But this problem started before COVID. Let's not try and make excuses that COVID's the reason that we're seeing this. These balance sheets were blowing out since the GFC. And, they kept pumping money into the economy. We're seeing that inflation in the property market. It's absolutely ridiculous, the amount of asset inflation we're seeing. And, you've got to despair for the future, Andrew. You just got to despair for the future.
Michael Kroger, in a lot of ways, it's hard to distinguish this from a Labor budget. It's a Labor-light budget. Is it also an election budget, do you think?
Well, obviously there's an element of that in it, which is the Liberal Party basically saying in times of crisis we're not going to run to austerity. We're going to provide whatever we can provide to get unemployment down. So, of course, there's an eye on what the community expectations are, and that's not unreasonable and unusual. But to take Michael's point, I agree. I'm not sure governments in the Western world will ever pay off the debts they've got. They're so humongous, quite frankly. But you look at the American debt, which was $28 trillion, which is now going to over $30 trillion. Well, most of that, you've got to remember, is internally borrowed. It's borrowed from pension funds and savings and loans funds. It's internally borrowed. So it's not as if America is at the whim of the Chinese. I think only 1 trillion out of the 30 is borrowed from the Chinese, 1 trillion from the Japanese. So you've got to keep these things in context. But is that an excuse for massive debt? No, we all hate debt at this level. I mean, in Victoria, Alan Stockdale and Jeff Kennedy inherited 33 billion in 1992, and people thought that was incredible, an incredible amount of debt. Well, in 2024, it's going to be 155 billion. So, of course, people are concerned about these debt levels, and you've just got to hope that borrowing rates remain low beyond the forward estimates and beyond 2024, which is the point at which the Reserve Bank says rates will continue at these levels. You've got to hope they continue to be very low, Andrew. Otherwise, countries will be in trouble. Will be in trouble.
Andrew, one final point. I mean, it's all very well to talk about growing the economy, but you can only grow an economy if productivity increases. And that's the problem with this. It's undermining productivity. All of the productivity figures are showing, either flat or negative growth. And you can't grow an economy unless you get productivity going. And that's the problem with all this debt binge that we've got at the moment.